It's another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. But before we get into it, are you subscribed? If not, please make sure to subscribe, like and share the video and spread the word. Because the Christian Reeve Podcast is here to stay. I love doing this and I love all of you that support me. So thank you. And yeah, let's get into this podcast, shall we? Boom! Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. Today's guest is an iOS developer, a film producer, a writer. He wears many hats. His name is Jaz Garewal. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Good. Actually, Jaz. It's like the music.
It.
No, it's all good.
This is the second time in like the last couple of episodes where I got someone's name slightly off. And it's like, oh man, I was so sure it was this way. Jaz. Okay. I do apologize. Okay.
No worries.
Yeah, let's jump straight into it. You are a iOS developer for the Bank of America. Tell us a little bit about this role and what it involves, what it's like working for them.
Actually, so I made the switch from B of A just recently to CVS now.
Okay, wow.
So CVS, is a pharmacy chain in the US.
So it's not the television.
No. So now, right. I always get that CBS versus CVS. So it's V as in Victor.
CVS.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Right. So, so an iOS developer for them. So same role, just different company. It's been interesting between the two of them because, I started at B of A briefly back in around this time of last year. Mm-hmm. After leaving a job as a all-around software developer for a small kind of boutique agency. I was with them for 5 years. And 2020 was, I feel like a chaotic year for everybody. I think that, is, kind of minimizes what happened, in 2020, but it was basically kind of upheaval for me in terms of leaving that company in January, starting with B of A, which, was a different environment because it's a big enterprise, working at a bank and seeing that, and then transitioning over to CVS and again, seeing a different big enterprise. But it's been fun. Part of the move, part of the reason why I moved from the smaller place to B of A and then CVS was to kind of refocus on iOS development. And it's been nice to kind of laser focus on one area instead of doing, before I was doing iOS, Android, and web app development.
If you work for sort of larger organizations, do you get more micromanaged, or are you kind of just left to your own devices as far as the app development is concerned? Like how much kind of involvement is there? Let's say, okay, for example, if you're working for a smaller company versus working for a larger company, how often do you find yourself kind of saying like, hey, I can do this, like leave it to me, versus, just kind of being given, let's say, a project and just running with it for 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. Obviously, with the smaller company, I was, in charge of, whenever we had a client, it was setting up their backend, setting up the server, and doing everything that the app or apps required. So I definitely had free reign. With B of A and CVS, I wouldn't necessarily call it micromanaging, but more, I think, just the way it's set up. Everything's, instead of, again, I had like free reign from start to finish with everything. With larger companies, I put on a team that's specifically, in CVS's case, I work on just, the start page that everybody sees in the app. And given that it's kind of intrinsic, that like, okay, that is, my domain. I don't really go outside that, so there's basic restrictions from the get-go with that kind of setup and modularization of it. So it's not direct, like people saying, hey, do it this way, do it that way. It's more, this is where I can work. And within that realm, I'm pretty free to do what I want. To get a feature out or get a bug fixed. But, I don't stray too far. And when I need to, if there's something that requires outside, it is kind of meetings, coordinating with people. That's been a lot, different, which I like. I went from being a solo developer per app. I was part of a development team, and we'd meet regularly and discuss, but never really totally worked with other developers at the smaller company. Whereas this is definitely very much a team-based environment.
Yeah, the reason I ask is that it's kind of interesting to me. I've spoken with quite a few different developers on the show, and just in general. Like I come from a marketing background, so it's like different field entirely. But the thing that I've noticed over the years is that there is this kind of like imaginary box, let's say, where if your creative ideas fit within that box, that's okay. But if they go outside of that box, it's like, well, we're just not going to do that. And that can usually be a corporate thing. That's why I use the term micromanagement, which often has negative connotations. And I don't necessarily mean it to have that. I mean, I think sometimes, it can be good to have a manager or a team leader that kind of guides the project. But I don't know, it depends. For me, I've always kind of preferred just being given the project and I deal with it, and then I come back to you, or I give you like fairly regular updates or stuff like that. Now, obviously, app development, software development is very different from marketing for obvious reasons. But the thing that I keep hearing from developers is that they have a great deal of creativity as far as like coding is concerned, and just in general being able to kind of be given a space with which to do that. But I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTuber Joshua Fluke, for example. I don't know, just throwing that out there.
No.
Okay, it's not especially important, okay. But the reason I bring him up is because he's involved in coding, he's involved in this sort of background, and he made a transition from that sort of how do I put this? God, my mind's going blank. Let's say that sphere, the corporate sphere,
the corporate environment, yeah,
to like his own thing, first freelance and then just eventually setting up his own business, where he sort of works for himself. And I find it very interesting him talking about his experiences, and I feel like I can relate to a lot of that on a corporate level as far as dealing with teams and stuff like that. But I do find the difference very different, obviously, between marketing and app development, because you guys do tend to get a lot of free reins, but there is still this kind of difference as far as company to company, because some companies will give you a lot more, some companies will give you a lot less. And I guess that's kind of what I'm intrigued to learn from you, is like how much sort of creative freedom are you afforded by each of the companies that you've worked for?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. You said the YouTuber was Joshua Fluke?
That's his name, yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of had a reverse path than him. I started out freelance and then went to this, boutique agency. And then, so I went, we basically passed each other on our career paths. But yeah, in terms of free reign, there's definitely, I think the main limitations I see is, not being able to use the latest and greatest iOS tech, because we're still supporting, older versions of iOS. Whereas at the smaller company, the apps I was working on were, for the most part, kind of built ground up. So I could, in this, it's like a new way for iOS user interfaces to be coded, to interact with data and all that. I won't be touching that for a while professionally at the current company. So there is that restriction. But in terms of executing, I think CBS, there's definitely more freedom in terms of defining kind of what I get to, how I approach different things. At B of A, they definitely were a lot more kind of stringent about and strict about what their code, how code can be implemented, how code can be architected. So they're definitely, and that was surprising, actually. One large company is not the same as another, when it comes to how they approach. They definitely do the same, in terms of project management. It's agile. So, and I didn't, this is 2020 was the first time I've had to deal with agile management or project management. So it's been interesting. It hasn't been a hindrance. It's just been more kind of like, okay, I've got to learn the terminology. I'm not sure what you guys are talking about, but I know what you guys want. So,
Okay,
yeah.
Let's explore that a little bit more. Like, tell us what you were used to,
Sure.
the work process you were used to before, and then like how it's changed as far as, okay, so you mentioned terminology, but what are the other factors that's sort of vastly different?
Yeah, it looks like, so yeah, I mean, going from the smaller company, the smaller agency to, at the smaller agency, it was all about, getting delivered designs, or UX flows, and using that to kind of break down what what the app requires at the back end, at the app level, and breaking those out into stories. In some ways it kind of felt like a loose agile, like looking back on it, it felt like a loose agile kind of system, but there weren't sprints or anything like that. It was just, from beginning to end, here's what we need for the app. And we would, ticket those out, give estimations on each one, and then just start knocking them out. And do it in such a way that, sometimes developers would switch, like, another developer would jump on that project. I'd be put on a different project. They'd be able to pick it up and run with it. And basically what it comes down to, with B of A and with CVS is, I guess, it's more of a strict form of that. You have sprints, which I knew, what they were coming into it beforehand, just having heard people talk about them, just, 2-week or 3-week long, basically, what is it? Just lengths of time to get a certain amount of work done.
Yeah.
And then, just other things like I think with Agile, and I think Safe Agile in particular, that's what I believe B of A was using, although I wasn't totally sure. But with CVS, it's Safe Agile. So there's trains and all that, which are, I guess, just different ways of how you kind of organize, teams and down to the different level. And in some ways, it's almost kind of, military in a way, like, or Marine, like, you got your fire team and your platoon or whatever, but not the same terminology, obviously, but it has that kind of feel to it.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. So you've also worked as a mobile app developer and software developer. I know obviously iOS counts as mobile app, but that's more of a one specific area. And like you said, you're kind of focusing on a specific version and everything. And there's a lot of work obviously involved with that, because iOS, there's just constant stuff that you have to work with and update and so on and so forth. But let's talk about the other projects that you've done in mobile app development and software development. Like, how does that differ? How did you get into that line of work? And what do you enjoy most about it?
Yeah, so, mobile and software development, it was just basically casting my net wider in a way. Like, I started off as an iOS developer when I started development. Actually, I can go back to I'm not a software developer, but this is, a career change for me.
Okay.
From, I think that was back in 2012 is when I made the pivot, because prior to that, I went to school for, media arts. I was doing music production, interning at a recording studio, got out of school, started doing editing for a local news station here, a local NBC affiliate, then worked with an independent company for a while. And as that company was kind of, winding down, I was kind of getting burnt out on post-production in general. I'd been doing a lot of my own projects as well, film production, had a crew, we'd shoot, shorts, we did one feature. And so as it was happening, as I was kind of winding down at the company, I was like, I think it might be, either I'm based in Tucson, Arizona, which is geographically it's close to LA, but would still, if I wanted to continue, I'd have to, relocate to LA basically at that point. And it was like, do I want to do that? Do I want to kind of in some way start from the beginning there? Or do I want to kind of see what else is out there? And so I just kind of got into iOS development because actually on a shoot, my director of photography just offhandedly said it would be nice to have a iPad app to be able to log clips as we shoot them. So once we get to, into Final Cut Pro, we have notes, we have, best takes already marked. I was like, let me try my hand at that and see what I could do. And got 70% of the way through when the company was starting to wind down. I was like, you know what, let me give this a try. And so that's how I got into freelancing, kind of built up a portfolio and got it with that smaller agency. And within that agency, they, after about a year there, they had a client who not only wanted an iPhone app, but also wanted us to take on their Android app as well. And I'd been looking into Android, and I said, you know what, let me give that a go and let's see what we can do. And yeah, and so expanded. And so that's where my, umbrella expanded beyond iOS into, mobile development at that point to, I was able to work with both kind of architect between the two. So, even though it's a different ecosystem and a different environment, somebody jumping in from, the iOS to the Android side to fix something for both apps could, find, where the, what needed to be fixed where. And so that was fun and also frustrating too, because you see the strength and weaknesses of both. And it's just like, if I could combine, the best of both, we'd have the perfect mobile platform. And so from there, that same client, actually, they decided they wanted a web app at that point as well. And so that's where I expanded into web development and kind of, basically at that point, just, had the app developer hat just because that umbrella expanded so big. And so the nice thing between the two is that, the nice thing with having that app developer hat was never being bored, right? Just jumping between each technology, kind of finding my way through everything, and also thinking at a higher level about, the architecture of not just architecting this so, it works and it makes sense as an iOS code base, but also thinking, okay, generally, how do I architect these so, so somebody jumping from, like I said, jumping from the iOS code base to the Android code base isn't totally lost. Like this is, totally doing it differently than iOS. I don't know, if I make a fix here, it'll break something down there. But then again, at the same time, there's the getting spread too thin problem and kind of getting burnt out. And I think that happened to me towards the end of 2019, or actually beginning of 2019. And that's when I realized, okay, you know what, let's step back and let's focus on one thing and kind of go back to the roots of iOS development.
I see. Okay, that makes a lot of sense actually, as far as focusing in one area. I kind of feel like it's the same with marketing. Like, unfortunately, I've been out of work for about a year now, but all of the job applications that I see, they want you to basically work everywhere. And marketing, just like software development, is a very vast field. I mean, you've got technical end, you've got just pure analytics, you've got, just standard conventional copy through old methods, then new digital marketing, then social media. I mean, there's just so many different spheres. And it's like each of them can have several jobs within them, but they expect you to just work everywhere and do everything. And it's just not realistic. But
yeah, right. Actually, do you mind if I ask you so what's your kind of specialty with marketing, or where did you find your?
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, I majored in management and marketing, but like predominantly it's always been content, social media, and analytics. Those have been my main areas. But I know like SEO, I know all of that. But my main interest has always been creative, and I kind of dabble in everything else, but that's where I tend to focus on. That's what I'm most interested in. But I don't know, I'm getting more and more into stats because especially with my content creation, with things like YouTube and podcasting, I even had a role at one point where my job was just purely analytics. And it is interesting, but I think it depends on the content that you're working with and like how kind of passionate you are about that. Like the time I had that professional role, I was working for like a trading company. So like it was kind of interesting to some extent, but at the same time, there was like a ceiling on how well the content would do, because
Right.
most people, generally speaking, wouldn't check out, financial trading on somewhere like YouTube. Like they have like their own online space, if you like threads and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Whereas
right.
with my own content right now, obviously the home is on YouTube or somewhere like TikTok or Instagram or whatever. So like
Right.
that's, you know what I mean? And you get much more rich analytics as far as things like demographics and age range and just all of these factors. And then that makes it just much more interesting in general.
And so that's for that, in terms of content, you're not necessarily print content, right? You're more into video, audio, kind of multimedia content. Is that right? Or
Everything really. I mean, I've never dealt with physical print
okay.
media. I've only ever dealt with like digital.
Right. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean print. Yeah, I meant digital print.
Right. Yeah. No, I've
Like,
worked.
I've just
I've worked on that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Paper print has kind of gone.
I mean, it's still there.
Okay,
It still works for certain companies. I think there is still a major demand for, especially now that we're sort of heading so far into like the digital world. There's this kind of almost demand for physical media, just physical objects in general. So I mean, there's always going to be a market for it. But yeah, gone are the days of it being like the main kind of
Right.
outlet.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you see that with vinyl, kind of. If you think about music,
Well, I mean,
so I wonder if we'll see that.
Vinyl has surpassed CD, which blew my mind. But it
right,
makes
that's
sense,
crazy.
because it's like it's CD has never been like. Well, I don't know. Actually, I was going to say it's never been attractive, but then again, all of the cool sort of features of CD were always the inside stuff. Like the booklets and the lyric books and stuff like that, which I suppose you could still get with vinyl, but the main draw of vinyl is actually the CDs themselves, and then the or the vinyls, I should say, and then the actual packaging as well. So, but you could, in theory, get all of the stuff that you get with CD with vinyl. So I don't know.
Yeah, it is interesting because I mean, there was the ease of use with CD, right? Like, and you could scratch a CD, granted, but I think, but at the same time, like, you have the ease of use now with streaming. So, I think there is, a novelty factor with vinyl, which makes sense for it to, it's more, CDs on the decline, vinyls having resurgence, and they kind of pass each other at I think, it's not going to be anywhere near what CDs were bringing into labels before profit wise, but it's definitely enough to blow the dust off a few vinyl factories to meet the new demand.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me, because I kind of just assumed that once everything went online and digital, that we would just never look back. Because I mean, there was loads of other things that died a death, like tape cassettes. If I try and tell, like, I don't know, my eldest brother what a tape cassette is, he'd be like, what? I mean, he might know it, I don't know, he's a clever kid, but like 100% he's probably never seen one, unless he's seen some of my dad's old stuff. But it's just something that's just kind of gone by. Do you know what I mean? It's swept. It's died a death. But then, like those vinyl stores were always around. CDs are still sold to this day. But I think the most interesting thing that I saw happen, or at least what I think is interesting, is the fact that, like, when new records are made, they make a vinyl version. Like, I kind of thought, like, the draw would always be in like classic vinyls, and people would always just be, on a collector's basis. So like, oh yeah, I've got the first version of the Sex Pistols first record or something. It's like you've got the first version, you get as collectors. Like, I got that element, but to see new new bands, new music coming out with the vinyl option, that was very interesting. But I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, I think, I mean, there still is that collector's mentality, I feel like, too, with it, but yeah, it is. I mean, it definitely is interesting and just to see the random places vinyl pops up, for sale, Like it's interesting. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes, if it, you know, has legs for a while. I mean, it's been, the resurgence has been around for a while. So
Yeah, I think it'll continue. Especially, I think if anything, it'll get stronger and stronger throughout the years because, you know, we're technology is moving so fast at the moment that I don't think we're noticing just how quickly it is moving. But at the same time, it's moving very fast, but it isn't. You know what I mean? It's like there's certain things that still exist that in theory shouldn't exist given the technological power that we have. But at the same time, we are restricted. So like, you know, gas powered cars
right.
is a good example. Like in theory, we don't need them at all. We don't need them, but we like having them. We like that. You know what I mean? I guess the nostalgia factor or the fact that, you know, we still got fossil fuels that we're using. But in theory, we could just have only electric cars. Why don't we have that? You know what I mean? It's and there's other things. I mean, for example, the fact that we even have, if we take it back to marketing, the fact that we even have physical, you know, things like billboards that are print only. Like I get that we've got like the interactive ones now, but you still see classic print posters, you know, old styles of marketing and sales that you would think wouldn't work, but they still work. I mean, Jesus, there's people still doing door-to-door sales. I mean, it's, and it's like, how does that still work? But it does. It does work. It's weird.
Yeah.
Or like leaflet marketing is a really good one. I get so many leaflets for like pizza joints or takeaway places. And I'm like, what's the point? But I guess in a way it's kind of useful. But like everything's done through apps now, you know? It's like...
Yeah, right. Well, I feel like, I mean, so in the case of billboards and even gas cars, it's kind of the, you know, there's the infrastructure legacy, right? Like how much does it take to convert that billboard to digital? And so I feel like, you know, there might be, you know, just kind of holding on to that, especially if like given the traffic around, you know, so in Tucson, like we don't have anywhere near the population of like New York, you know, New York City. And so converting billboards around that area makes sense to digital because you got a lot of eyes going by it. And so you want to be able to rotate, you know, what's showing on it and maximize how many people see it. Whereas in Tucson, you know, we have I-10, you know, this one freeway that goes kind of on the outskirts of it. And, you know, there's some billboards leading in and out of it, but not enough eyes on it, I think, to justify going digital. And I'm sure there's some billboards there that have been, you know, the same ad sent, you know, for like the past 2-3 decades. So, and then
it's kind of mad. Too. It's mad when that happens. But I get your point. It's a very solid point. If you don't need to spend the money, like, why spend it? Like,
yeah, right. Well, it all comes down to the ROI, right?
Yeah, no, it's a solid point. I mean, like you said, if there's not going to be enough eyeballs on it, or to put it a better way, if there's not going to be enough conversions from that investment, obviously return on investment, then there's just going to be no point in the investment in the first place. But, you know, I don't know. I mean, there's still companies that dump tons upon tons into, like Coca-Cola. I've mentioned this before on the podcast. It still astounds me how much money they put into advertising. But I guess in a way it keeps the brand forever strengthened. I mean, but I wonder, like, what would happen if they just wouldn't advertise for like a year? Like, what would that do? Would it make a difference? Would it affect their stock price, shares? Would it affect the sales? Like, part of me feels like, nah, it wouldn't. It's such a well-known brand. But then part of me is like, I don't know, you know, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, because I mean, they've established the brand, right? So the can itself and the bottles themselves are part of the advertisement. But I think, again, like actually that kind of goes to the old school infrastructure too, like, but just internally at Coke, like they have this way of doing marketing that I think just changing the way that shit moves, you know, in terms of really changing up how they market is just not in the cards for them. I think even if they kept seeing, you know, lower and lower conversions for print and TV marketing and more for, you know, online, I'm not sure how much that would get them to change their marketing plan, quickly, it's not going to move, basically at the pace of tech, right? I feel like that's part of it. Is you've got these institutions who are, and going back to fossil fuels too, you have these oil companies who are not going to let go of their control over who makes what car, kind of thing. And I mean, not conspiracy theory wise, but I think there's vested interests between the oil companies, or actually more so in the oil companies, to keep gas cars on the road.
Yeah, I mean, I reckon it's one of those things that if you're a major company earning that much money on a daily basis, you probably only really tend to look at these things and start making cuts when you're actually losing money on a noticeable scale. So if you're Coca-Cola, I mean, it would take a lot for you to notice your losses. But I mean, if we take the pandemic as an example, people being less able to be in all of the different areas that Coke is sold. I mean, obviously Coke is sold everywhere, so it's not massively going to affect, purchasing, but it's still a valid point that there might be some areas, let's say holiday destinations, where people are not frequenting as much. Therefore, the sales of Coke in those areas might decrease. Therefore, they might have to sort of say, okay, we need to make cuts in certain areas, in order to just, make sure we're not wasting money unnecessarily. But again, I think it would take a lot for a company like that to really, because I think, like you say, they've got this established infrastructure there where they probably, if they look at things like ad spend or like how much money we're going to spend on this particular thing for obviously every company has budgets. They have, okay, this is our budget for this quarter. This is the budget for this quarter. And I feel like, like I've worked in companies where the budget was really high and we didn't need to spend it, but they just spent it anyway. Cause like, why not? And it's like, that always kind of blew my mind. Like, if you don't need to spend it, like, save it, use it for next quarter. I don't know. Like, this seems weird to just spend it because you have it. But
yeah, well, I wonder if because I know with especially government side spending here, if a department doesn't spend their budget, then their budget's lowered the next, whatever the next term is. So I wonder if it's that, if it's like we've got to spend it.
Oh, absolutely, it could be. Moving it forward, like, what are the major challenges associated with being a mobile app developer and a software developer, or just development in general? Like, what are the main things that make it difficult, that challenge you on a daily basis?
On a daily basis, really these days it's sad to say, but it's what did Apple break in this release kind of thing.
Damn.
Yeah, so actually last year I switched from an iPhone to Android Pixel, just to see what Android was like, keeping up with it, but also because iOS 13 was just such a mess. Like on the development side, I could see it was just introducing, and Apple seems to have this up and down cycle of they release something which just kind of breaks a lot of things on both the development side but also on the user side. And iOS 13 was one of those, and I was just like, all right, I'm going to take a break from iOS and from an iPhone and check out Android. And so it is just a matter of what kind of workaround, what's not going to work as expected when I try to implement a feature, and how am I going to go, how am I going to fix that? And there's things that, given the years, I know from the get-go, like, it still hasn't been fixed, or still behaves weird, and you have to do this weird little trick to get it to work, or this will not work in certain situations, and so I have to be mindful of either, are we going to hit that situation and do I have to work around it, or are we not? So those, that's the challenge there. It's not necessarily with iOS in general, it's not necessarily trying to keep up with the changes. I think they do a good job of making the changes iterative. So, they might pack in some new features that make things a little easier. I mentioned Swift UI earlier. That is a big change, and it does require a little bit more, kind of research of learning what those changes, how those changes will impact or not even impact. It's a different way of doing development for iOS that is optional. You can use it or you don't have to use it. You can use the existing way, which of course, where I'm at right now, because we're not going to be just supporting iOS 13 and above, we're not going to jump on that. So, but I mean, on a broader sense, I think when I was doing more broad range development, especially with web app development, there was the keeping up with technology, keeping up with new frameworks, or keeping up with new ways that, the frameworks change, just because that is definitely more of an open source environment. And so having those, frameworks change all the time, having new frameworks do, fancier things or do things more securely, having to keep up with that knowledge, that was the challenge there.
So which mobile app software do you think is the best one, or the best, maybe let's say the best for the user in general?
It's going to sound like I'm biased. I'm going to say iOS,
Okay.
But I think when I was using iOS, it just feels, iPhone, having used the Pixel for a year, there were things with it. Like it definitely comes down to like a PC versus Mac debate, right?
Okay.
PC, I always know, with Windows machines, it always feels like after a year, it's kind of getting sluggish. And, I remember when I owned, Windows machines, that was around the time you'd want to reformat and restore back up, and it would, be on its feet again. The Pixel was the same thing. After about a year, battery life was, getting pretty funky. Weird things would happen. Like I'd be listening to Spotify and I'd want to take a picture, and that would just reset my phone. So, but there were awesome features on there too that, Apple needs to catch up with, like the call screening feature, having it screen calls that it didn't recognize and letting me see, like, I don't know. Are you familiar with that feature? Have you heard about that? Basically what happens is if a phone call comes through that you don't recognize, it will say, ask you if you want to answer it or if you want to screen it. And when you screen it, it reads out in text, like you could see it, and it's talking to the person calling, saying like, the user you're calling doesn't recognize this number. Can you say why you're calling? And I can see their answer.
It's weird.
Yeah, it's great. And then they could say like, hey, this is why I'm calling. I could press a button saying like, tell me more, and it would have a conversation. And I could choose to take it or just say, I'll call you back. And I was really sold on it when I was out with a friend. He had a Pixel 3. And I was like, oh, I heard about the call screen feature. And at that point, his wife decided to call. He's like, oh, here, let me show you. And he hit screen. It's like, the user you're calling doesn't recognize, this number. Can you tell why you're calling? And I could read her saying, seriously, you're doing this to me? And so that was a cool feature, a really helpful feature. But in general, iOS is just a little bit more. Yeah, it's just a little bit more tighter. It feels tighter.
I haven't experienced that particular thing that you said, but I did experience something kind of similar many, many years ago that was really odd. That I don't know if many people will know about this, but in like, let's say 2009, something like that. So a long time ago, a friend of mine called up my home phone, or he texted my home phone, right? Which I didn't even know you could do, but apparently you can do that. And if you do that, back then, what would happen is you would receive sort of like either a call or a voicemail. I can't remember if it was a call or a voicemail, one of the two. But when you would pick it up, you would get a robotic voice. So what I heard on the phone was, hey, Christian, are you going to come to the skate park today? See you later. I was like, what the
fuck? Right. That you shut all your blinds at that point, lock the doors.
No, but like, I suppose you just randomly come across these things a lot of the time by accident. But yeah, that thing that you just laid out, that just seems like just like a way of trolling someone because they know what you're doing. Like your friend knew what they were doing. They're like, why are you doing this to me, man? Like,
yeah, right. Yeah. It's just a new tool for mischief.
I'd rather someone just be like, text me and be like, I just don't want to talk to you, rather than just
Yeah, right.
like that. You know what I mean? Jesus. So what are your kind of goals and aspirations with your career? Like what are the main things you want to achieve? Because you mentioned that you had this major career change, which we'll backtrack. We'll get to that. But
Right.
I wanted to kind of know like where the future is, because a lot of people, as you say, you did it in the reverse. You started as an independent contractor and you sort of moved forward to corporate. So that intrigues me because a lot of people would probably do it the other way around, would be trying to get out of corporate to set up their own thing. So they've got that sort of freedom of choice as far as like time is concerned. So what are your kind of like goals and aspirations for your career right now?
Yeah, I mean, career-wise, I think I'm, pretty satisfied with it
Cool.
at this point. Like, I think I've kind of reached a point where, for the next few years, I think I'm comfortable with where I'm at because I think, especially with, I've always worked from home when it came to software development, freelancing. And then the company I worked for was based all the way on the other side of the States. And so I was working from home there. I actually joined B of A because I kind of wanted to see what it was like to work in an office, and started in February, and then March comes around and we're all working from home. Like, okay. So and so but at the same time I got that itch scratched by at least working from an office for about a month and a half, and it's like, okay, this is what it's like. Commutes still kind of suck, and but it was nice to see people, and but at the same time, I think the difference with the larger companies is, I'm on meetings a lot, even, video meetings all the time. And so you get that interaction. It might not be, in person, but it's a lot more than I had before when I was working at the smaller company. So I think, just, I mean, eventually maybe I'd like to kind of move into a management type role, because I do, when I left film production and post-production, I was a manager of a team of editors of about 35 people. And that was, great, because there's I think I really enjoyed the kind of the mentoring aspect too. And I've actually I found I've been able to take on that role by having a larger team. There are people I can kind of mentor and then also, peers that I can work alongside with, which has been great. Like yesterday, I spent most of my day working with another iOS developer. He shared his screen, and we just kind of walked through code and, took a sizable chunk of code and kind of changed it up so it made more sense. And then on another level, I've been part of a really good group called Underdog Devs, which they have you heard of them? Or
yeah, it rings a bell for some reason.
Okay, yeah, so they basically help underprivileged and formerly incarcerated people get jobs in development.
Cool.
And so I came across them a couple months ago, and just thought it was really good idea. They're doing a lot of good work, and so I jumped on board and started mentoring two developers. And one of them actually just got a job a few weeks ago, his first iOS development job, and so that's been great. So that, again, that kind of helps that, again, where I kind of want to go. So I feel like I'm definitely moving in that direction. But it also helps as well, because that I've kind of got back into screenwriting again, and also all the way back to my college days, started doing dabbling in music production again, and playing around and recording some stuff too. So I think that helps kind of temper any feeling of like I need to keep any need to like keep I don't want to say keep growing. I feel like I am growing, like I think, but in definitely different areas. So I don't feel like any big urge to shift anything just yet.
That thing you were talking about with regards to like wanting to know what it's like to work in an office, like I know where you're coming from on that. Like, I've mostly worked in offices, so like I've always been, really itching to do remote. And then when I finally got to do it, I was like, thank the Lord. But everyone has a different experience, right? But I totally get it, because to me, that kind of feels like missing the university days almost, as far as it pertains to, like, missing chance encounters, chance conversations. Obviously a lot of the time in offices, people are coming and going, you know what I mean? The turnover rate can be high, not always necessarily for bad reasons, just because people move quickly,
Right.
every 6 months, every year, whatever, right? So you're meeting a lot of different people, and you're working with a lot of different people, and you don't get that experience if you're working from home, if you're independent, whatever. And me personally, I don't think I'll ever miss that, because I have work where I get to work with people, I do volunteering, I do various things where I can have that experience, but I need to be on my own when I'm doing work. Like, I've never really spoken about this before. Maybe I'll cover it in a video one time, but I genuinely worked in an office one time where there were people, grown adults, screaming and like throwing stuff at each other. And like, okay, we worked in marketing. Okay, you would never see this shit in like IT. It just never happens. People are quiet. They're doing their job. There might be some quiet murmurs, but there's none of this, because everyone's busy getting shit done.
Right. Well, there's like Nerf gun battles every so often.
Yeah,
like
maybe if you're working in like a fucking startup or some shit.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
But like in the major companies, like a lot of the time, you just want to kind of come in and get the job done and go home.
Yeah.
And I guess I was kind of disgruntled anyway, but like it just really bothered me. I was like, luckily there was somewhere that I could escape to. It was a higher floor, because they had like certain levels of floors that that they owned in this building. So they had like a lounge place at the top of the building where you could sit and do your work. And I would always go there because it was just too noisy on the floor that I worked. And I was like, this is ridiculous. This is worse than school. Like how loud this is. But at the same time, it is good to have people around you. It's useful. It can sometimes help with the work as far as getting stuff done. There are certain limitations to only having Zoom calls and stuff, and I can only imagine how difficult it must be if you need to sort of communicate with your colleagues in the coding situation. But then again, everything you do is computer based, and so there is that element. That's not to say that isn't the case with marketing, but marketing's a lot more, I don't know, it just somehow differs. I can't explain it, but it's like sometimes it is useful to have that occasional physical meeting. But I did kind of find that I could do my job pretty much 100% from home, and like we'd only really need like one meeting per month. Like there were so many meetings where I was like, this could have been an email. Like this does not need to be. Like most of the time I'd find myself resenting the meetings. I'd be like, I could be getting shit done right now. What we doing? Like,
yeah, no, I totally get that. But I think, I think to your point too, with like marketing, having the people in the room and having that energy, I think you can't get that. Like it definitely, not to say like, it gets killed, on video conference, but it's just, I feel like you don't have that synergy just because everybody's up in a grid. And so that just, subconsciously or technically, it just kind of kills that, that whatever that extra thing is. Where I would say that like with technology, like with development and everything, you don't necessarily need that. Everything is a lot more, I mean, just the nature of it, it's much more logic based anyways. It's more technical. You don't lose that. Or I mean, I don't think that I think it's what you do lose in that aspect is just the kind of camaraderie that you get from that group, being in that group environment. But I think that camaraderie, and something on the marketing side and the creative side, that goes into, I feel like that goes into what the output is. Whereas that's not, that camaraderie doesn't really show up in code at this point.
I think it really depends on your team. Like I've just unfortunately had like negative experiences. So
Oh yeah. Oh right.
For me, I was just very, very eager to get out of corporate, because the one thing that I was always bothered about with corporate is that I have lots of ideas naturally as a creative person. And the reality is when you're working for someone, for an organization, you know, and this is one of the reasons why I asked you those creativity questions earlier, because for me, there was always a ceiling with regards to where my ideas could go. So you might have like a new manager or new head of department who might humor you for a while, but eventually it's just going to be, no, this is how I want to do it. And you're like, but this is not logical, or this would be better, or we tried this 6 months ago and it didn't work. And they're just like, just do it. And then you do it, and then they come to you like a month later and are like, why is this not working? And you're like, and I don't know. And then there was so many ideas that I had where they just would never do it, or, you know, they did it after I left, or I don't know. There was just so many things that just pissed me off about it. And I'm just so glad to not work in corporate anymore. But I get it. I get it. No, everyone has a different experience. So,
well, and I think like in theory, if you look at it, like it seems like, you know, on the marketing side too, there's, you know, at the corporate level, everything is also sectioned off. Everybody has their own little area that they work with. And I think on the app side of things and the software development side of things, it naturally makes sense and works fine. But yeah, on the creative side of things, it doesn't. Like you're just not able to, really kind of expand. And I think after so many times of getting beaten back down, you kind of give up, and that just lessens your impact in general. So I could definitely see that, you know, I think, that being said, like, I think with development, there could be a point where it's too, you know, reined in. But I think in general, at least from what I'm seeing, and maybe, again, I've only been, you know, in the corporate side for about a year now. I ask me in a year, I could be like, take these chains off.
I should hope not. I mean, I would hope that, because here's another thing as well. Like, that question that you get in job interviews where they say, where do you think you're going to be in 5 years? And I used to think that question was really dumb. And I do still think it's a bit dumb, but I would ask, like, where do you see yourself in like 2 years? I think that's a lot more sensible, because with you, you know, you're kind of looking at it like, you know what? I imagine like job security is one thing that you're looking at. Like this is a lot, you know, more preferable to freelance, where I have to, you know, constantly be on the grind trying to find projects. And, you know, I could get kicked off of the project at any time. And that's not to say that that can't happen in a corporate job, but like you're protected in the sense that you know what I mean? Projects take longer in general. And, you know, it's a lot harder to end, you know, relations with someone if you're working for an organization, versus if you just have like a contract on a freelance basis, the other party can just be like, we've changed our mind and now we don't want to do this anymore, and you just rescind it. And it's like, well, fuck, what do I do now? But so I get like the reasons why. And I think that generally you do always have to have a rough plan. You know what I mean? Anyone that says like they don't have a plan is just being silly. There will always be like a rough idea in your head of like, okay, in theory, this is what I would like to be doing in like a year or 2 years from now. And but that's why that question is silly, because in 5 years is a long time, but you could probably map out at least between 6 months to 2 years. That's realistic.
Right. And I feel like 5 years also, you're both sides of the table know you're lying. It's like, oh, I'll be here, I'll be excelling at this company. You know, it's like 5 years.
Well, no, I mean, the best response to that question is, oh, I'll be sitting in your chair. Like, we all know that's the best.
Yeah, right.
But it can go either way, because either they think you sound like an arrogant prick and they don't want anything to do with you, or they're like, ha, that was great, you're hired.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it could also be a kiss ass type thing too.
Yeah. Well, no, but again, it depends, because some places want kiss asses. A lot of places want kiss asses. But
I mean, like with an answer to that question, it's like, because you'll be my, you know, boss, because you'll be a director and I'll be in that chair and we'll be so happy together.
Oh, I hate kiss asses.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's move it forward. So you've worked in a full-time capacity as well as on an independent contractor basis. Like, what are the major ways that this kind of, like, how do these two types of work differ? You know, there's going to be obvious answers to this question, and we've already explored some of them. But like, what are the benefits and drawbacks of each, and like, you know, how do they really compare?
Yeah, I mean, so I think for me, because I started independent contracting just because I needed to get experience on my resume anyway. So it was different. You know, there's definitely a different experience there than I think kind of your seasoned contractor who's, you know, freelancing, you know, contract to contract. And so for me, I mean, first off, it was the pay scale because I was, you know, charging so little just to get the experience. And I think also I didn't totally get into these situations, but you hear the horror stories where, you know, the goalpost is moved over, you know, or people keep coming back asking for, you know, new revisions. I never experienced that. I was lucky enough to, you know, the contracts I had, the people I worked with were, you know, great. They liked what I delivered. I liked their ideas. It was a good, you know, relationship with all of them. So I didn't really have any, you know, horror stories like that. But I think given a year or two more of it, I probably would have run into that. You know, and then I think I kind of had that. So with the first company I worked with, them being a small agency, I kind of had that freelance feel to it where I was working on a new project, you know, every 6 months, a whole new app, not even like a new feature or anything, a whole new app every 6 months or so. And so that was nice, you know, that was fun and kept things interesting. And I feel like a lot of the challenges were the same, but I didn't have that, issue where I was interfacing with the client, you know, where, you know, could turn, you know, there were people there, you know, program product managers who would deal with the client and interface with the client and distill things. And I you know, I talked to the client too as needed, just to explain things or walk through things. But I think, you know, if going from the anecdotes I've heard, interfacing with the client's always the gamble, right? And so I think I kind of came out of that without having really faced that. And then, you know, going into corporate, it's the big difference is, you know, the project is the same, you know, it doesn't change. It's, you know, I'm working in one specific area, fixing bugs on that, adding features to it, and that's it, you know. And granted, it's only been about, you know, almost 6 months with CVS now, but you know, if we reach the end of the year and I'm still on the same, it'll be kind of one of the longer projects I've worked on, and that'll be that going forward. So that's the difference, or the noticeable difference for me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Sort of final question as far as the software side of things is concerned. What makes the perfect type of software, in your opinion?
Oh, that's a good question. I think with that, it comes down to, I think, and you see this with Apple products a lot, it's just the intuitiveness. You know, if there's a design that, you know, a lot of people talk about, like, you know, it's a delight to use. I think that's kind of the icing there. I think if you nail the intuitiveness first and then make it delightful to use, then you, I think that's the perfect piece of software. And I can point to the Tesla Model 3. Have you seen the so that it's all touchscreen, right? The car. Yeah, it has no, you know, it just has, you know, the indicator stock and another stock for, you know, interfacing with the gear shift, but everything else is all touchscreen. And if that's not intuitive, that car's not selling. I mean, even worse, that car is like crashing into things. You know, people are trying to figure out, you know, how to turn the wipers on or whatever. And they did a solid job making it intuitive. I don't necessarily think there's the delight to use part of it. There's some of it there, but I think at the same time it just nails the intuitiveness, and I think that's perfect for it because it's a utilitarian thing. And I feel like that's something car companies have been struggling to get right for a long time. Like, I think all their in-dash, you know, systems up until recently have been just like, oh, this is like, I have to dig through a menu just to change a radio station, you know,
Yeah,
stuff like
right,
that.
yeah. No, yeah, I'd agree with that as well. I think ultimately it's always going to be about the user's experience, UX,
Right.
really, isn't it? But
Yeah.
yeah, awesome, man. Yeah, let's move it forward. So we've mentioned that you've worked as a film producer and writer. So tell us some of the projects that you've worked on, and I mean, you could sort of touched on why you made that switch, but it is a major switch from, you know, film to software development. So let's explore that a little bit. Like you did mention that it was to do with sort of burning out and stuff, but like, why didn't you sort of like take time from that and then maybe try a different area of film development, or maybe take a break from it and return to it? Like, why did you just sort of say, do you know what, I'm going to run with this software gig and go down that route instead?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, so with film, I feel like I kind of explored every area with it. Like I did, you know, production, I did writing and directing, you know, motion graphics, even, you know, composing. And I think for me personally, I feel like in terms of, because I mean, the overall goal was to, you know, make my own stuff, which I did. But I think the real goal was to make stuff that like I was proud of. And so I think you know, for a while, I think the last thing I made, which was a you know, time travel comedy short,
Cool.
it was I liked it, and I thought it, you know, I did a good job with it, but I felt like I was kind of at the point where I was getting diminishing returns, like, and I think part of that was just being burnt out. Like I wasn't getting as good as I thought I could be in a reasonable time frame, where I felt like, yeah, you know, I could definitely see, you know, the active burnout happening faster than the quality. And I think there's a point, you know, where you reach a next level and it's just like that kind of refreshes you. And I just don't think, I kind of missed that, like kind of plateaued a little bit before that would happen. And, you know, just, it was too slow of a rate improvement. I sound really technical about this, but it was basically, it's just, you know, yeah, just feeling like I wasn't getting a good emotional return. And it was coming from me at that point. And so,
hey, you know, fair play, man. Fair play.
yeah. And so that's when it was just like, you know what, let's switch to software development, because, you know, because with film, writing, production, all that, even, you know, doing freelance work and freelance post-production for people, there's just that abstract area of like, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't fit. It feel finished. With development, it's like, it works or it doesn't, right? It's, you know, and so I feel like that's partly why subconsciously I think I was guided to it. It was just like, it was definitely black or white. And I felt like maybe I needed that to refresh that, you know, that abstract sense of everything not, and you know, they always say like, you know, whatever artistic endeavor you're working on never feels finished.
That's true.
And so, but I feel like that's not the case in software development, unless of course, you know, going back to the clients who always move the goalpost, but you know, there's still a hard finish line, or a hard, like, you know, okay, this feature is done. Whereas with film, it's like, maybe I can tweak this edit and it'll feel faster, or it'll feel tighter. Maybe it needs better color correcting. Maybe the color correcting is off, and that's why the scene's looking too flat. Or maybe we shot the scene too flat and there's nothing we can do unless we want to go and reshoot it again. And so, but that being said, like, I think doing software development and kind of, you know, let me kind of recharge in that sense, because, you know, I've kind of come back to starting, you know, to writing again. But just like doing weird projects, like one of the projects I did, like, just randomly, I had an idea. You know, I've been watching South Park forever now, and I had a random idea of making, after watching It Chapter 2, that horror movie, like where the adults come back to their, you know, childhood hometown. I was like, oh, what if we take the South Park characters and make them have to come back to South Park? And so I made it this, you know, comedy noir type thing, and you know, I had fun with it, and I was like, all right, you know, I'm kind of I felt more pleased with it than what I did in the past. Yeah. So I was like, okay, so maybe I've recharged enough and I've kind of stepped away from it enough that I'm not as like, I'm not kicking myself as much. And I feel like, being hard on yourself is kind of one of the worst things you can do, when it comes to creative endeavors.
Yeah. Like I've had a lot of people ask me in the past, like, oh, where do your ideas come from, or how do you keep it going? And to be honest with you, the main thing that I do is I just focus on letting the ideas come to me. Like I do have certain things on the back burner for like times when maybe I don't have as many ideas. But if I feel like, I don't know, I just don't have ideas, I just take a break, take a rest, you know what I mean? And go and get inspired. That's the key thing as well. Like if you're feeling burnt out, if you're feeling like you just don't have ideas, like you're kind of sick of it, take a break. Like if you're not enjoying it, you shouldn't be doing it. That's the be all end all of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not going anywhere. Like you can just come back to it and it'll be the same thing, but you'll be different because you'll have rest, experiences, time has passed, and it's fresh. And it's just, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. Yeah.
Like you say, people push too hard. People push themselves too hard, and they shouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's where it was hard for me to make that transition, because it's, very much like I defined myself as like, want to be screenwriter, want to be director, and, got some stuff out. And it was just like, you know what? Something's just not working right. So I just, got to take a break from, or not even, it was very consciously like, am I going to come back to this? I don't know, but it's just not working right now.
That's fair enough, man. This one's a bit of an interesting question. I've been asking a lot of my guests this recently, and I think it's always an interesting question to ask. What's the biggest life lesson that you've learned so far?
The biggest one was actually when I was a kid. I was getting stressed out. You're about to take the SATs to, the college exam, to get into college. And my dad just, kind of said, don't, anytime something seems hard, just kind of persevere through it, because, you'll basically get to a point where everything feels all right again. These things come in waves. And so just anytime things have felt difficult, or it just felt like, I was down the wrong path, it was just like, it's keep optimistic about it. And I feel like I definitely have been returning to that during, the pandemic, because it's just like, these are definitely hard times, and it's, but you can look back to, the flu pandemic, back in 1918, things did return to normal. And so it's just a matter of like, okay, just, buckle down. And a lot of what I've been telling myself, and just, people in general, it's just like, this is a unique time. We've been at home. Think about how you want to remember how you use this time, because it's going to be a memory soon. And it's not going to be like this indefinitely. So just think about how you want to look back on this time, and think of it that way. And so that's been helping for me. And and so that's kind of, a life lesson I kind of pulled from my dad, and kind of definitely figured out how to apply it for myself during this time.
That's awesome advice, man. Thank you for sharing that. Like, I totally agree with you. And to be honest with you, it's the first time I've heard someone say something positive like that. Like, a lot of people have been sort of saying, like, oh, this is the new normal now, and it's never going to quite return to normal, or, it's never going to end, or this, that, and the other. And it's like, no, eventually it does have to end. Like, certain things will be different. But I think for the better, like, for example, personal hygiene. Like, I've been saying this for years, like the amount of men's bathrooms I walked into where guys just don't wash their hands, or, for example, and I've mentioned this on the podcast again, so sorry for the broken record, but since we've been talking about workplaces, right, there is this kind of underlining kind of unwritten rule about sickness, or at least there was, where, if you're sick, you need to still come to work regardless. Like, you can't be sick, they might say that you get sick pay and blah blah blah, but at the end of the day, if you start being sick and it's sustained and long enough, they're just going to fire your ass because they can easily replace you. That's the reality. So then there's this pressure to never be sick, which for humans is impossible. We are going to get sick. It's a thing that happens. It's just life. But here's the thing, like the best thing to do, say if someone's got a flu and it's flu season, is just take a day off, take a couple of days off, come back. Then you're not going to spread it. Therefore, no one else is going to get it. Therefore, there's going to be less problems with retention and stuff. And B, you're going to be able to return to work quicker. Because if you're pushing yourself to work when you're sick, your body, like someone said this to me recently, and I think this is the perfect way of explaining it. If you don't take a day to rest, your body will choose it for you. And I think that's spot on. And I think hopefully moving out of this COVID-19 pandemic, there'll be more understanding and compassion from those employers to kind of say, okay, they're sick, take, relatively speaking, the time that you need off to deal with it and don't bring it with you. Because obviously, if you're talking about COVID-19, everyone will take that seriously. But why not, other viruses,
Right. And but I feel like that's also, there's a lot of jobs where they just don't allow, they don't have the system in place to allow for it. It's like, you calling, you're like, I'm sick. It's like, well, who are going to get to cover you? They don't have enough people.
It's your problem. It's not my problem.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so I feel like there's a lot more, pressure put on employees.
And also, because the thing is that there's always this mistrust thing. Like, I don't know, in my experience, particularly when I worked in like customer services years ago, it would always be this thing of like, you need to prove that you're sick.
Yeah.
Like, well, you don't sound sick. And it's like, well, it's not that kind of sick. And like, sometimes I would just mess with them. So like when they would say that, I'd be like, well, I don't know, man. I mean, I can go to the bathroom and call you next time it happens, but
Right.
I don't know what you want, some audio visual proof or whatever. But that's a problem. But they should trust you. But because there's so many people that try to exploit the system, they immediately don't trust you. And then that's the pressure that's always there and like kind of why you can never be sick. So hopefully that does change.
Yeah, but at the same time, I just don't like, it's like, what's being exploited, right? It's like either you're just not paid for that work because you're out sick, or you have sick time and you burn through that sick time. It's just like, what's to exploit? It's
well, a lot of the time, I mean, because I've had both. I've had jobs where they don't pay you for the sick day, but normally that's kind of a bit dodgy in the UK. I think it's normally like, if they don't pay you, it will be because, like, I don't know, you work a casual 0 hours contract or something like that. If it's a standard full-time contract, you should get statutory sick pay by law. But here's the thing. They don't necessarily have to pay you. Statutory sick pay is the minimum pay that the government pays you, or I don't know, that you get paid, right? But the employer doesn't have to pay you at the normal rate. They can just pay the statutory rate. So I think the statutory rate is just minimum wage. So like, let's say you're earning £10 an hour in your current rate. They'll be like, well, we're not going to pay you that because you're not here. So we'll just pay you the minimum.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, you can do that. It's legal, but it's a bit shitty. I don't know.
Yeah, right. It is. But at the same time too, like it's, then I guess there is that. I mean, that there is that. Again, what's being exploited too, because like there's like a limit to how much sick time you get, right, over there on the contract, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the only way you could exploit the system would be if you would use your sick day, like if you're given sick days where you're allowed to be sick and it's almost counted as a holiday. I suppose in theory you could take them as like holiday days. Like, I remember like I worked in a supermarket one time and I worked with this guy who in retrospect was very clever. I mean, he used to mess around and fuck around and he didn't take it seriously, but he was a smart dude. He knew what he was doing. So he exploited the sick system by basically, I think it was every year or every quarter, you had a certain amount of sick days that you could take before you got a formal warning. So he would take those. But here's the detail, right? It was always periods. So if you take off, say, 2 weeks, right, that counts as one interval. So this was bullshit, right? If I would take off 2 sick days or 3 sick days in one period, right, they count as those intervals. So it wouldn't matter if the other person has taken off, let's say, they've taken off 2 weeks, and that will only count as one interval. Whereas if I've taken 3 sick days in the space of like 6 months, I get punished, but he doesn't, even though he's clearly taking the piss.
Right.
And, like, no one is sick for like 2 months. Sorry, for
Right.
2 weeks with the flu. Like, that's bullshit. And they knew that he was doing this, but he was clever about it because he kept just, making sure that he turned up eventually, and he did it by that system. It's very clever. But yeah,
yeah. That's okay. All right, I can see that. But that's the system, their own system shooting themselves, and it's made to be exploited.
Crazy. So you're from Tucson, Arizona. So what are the best and worst things about Tucson, Arizona?
Yeah, Tucson. Wow, I've been here basically my whole life. I was born in Portland, Oregon.
Cool.
Moved when I was 2, so just enough to get used to the weather there. And now the worst thing obviously in Tucson is, I don't know if you're familiar with Arizona, but southern Arizona, it's the heat.
Okay.
It gets up to a couple years back up in Phoenix, which is a little north of us, it got to about 120 Fahrenheit.
I think that's about 40 degrees centigrade, I think, maybe.
So yeah, it basically was enough to shut down our international airport there because the tires were melting.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, the heat is killer here during the summer.
How do you cope with the heat when it gets that bad? Like, what do you do?
Stay indoors and turn on the AC. That's it's basically how. But I mean, the upside though is because of the sun, because of the heat, and it's pretty clear year round. We just got solar panels installed.
Last year. That's a really good point. Actually, you must be able to power so much with solar panels.
Well, so our roof is not like the roof wasn't able to get as much solar panels as we'd like to be able to power everything. So we're not 100% solar, but we're close enough, and it definitely brings down our electricity bill.
Right.
I have a friend who he's got full solar, I think more than he needs. Plus he's got like the Tesla power walls to store power, so at night, so he's like totally able to go off the grid and all that. But yeah, in terms of things, I mean, Tucson is nice. Cost of living is amazing here. Like, with tech jobs, I've, interviewed at Apple, interviewed at Google, and just the idea of moving there is, because here, we've got, pretty sizable house, 2-story, and it costs maybe, I would easily say like a tenth of what just a small, like, 2-bedroom house out in Silicon Valley would cost, in Palo Alto, that area. And so yeah, cost of living is really, really solid in Tucson. So that's, I mean, there's things that, other people would talk about, like it's a desert here. People like the desert landscape. I think it looks like Mars, so I'm not too sold on it.
Not a fan.
But
fair enough.
Yeah, so I'm not, I think I like cooler climes.
As we draw everything to a close for today, do you have any sort of upcoming projects or maybe some final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, let's see. Upcoming projects. Like I said, I've been writing again. I've actually been part of the somehow found my way into the horror subreddit, and they have a screenplay challenge every quarter. And so I, jumped into that, but of course I'm not a huge horror fan. So my screenplay is not coming into a horror type thing, but yeah, that I think, releasing that, if anybody's interested, it'll be on, I think Screenplay Challenge is the Reddit.
Awesome.
And that'll be in March. And And yeah, other than that, I'm just, like I said, I think just final thoughts is kind of reiterating what I said before, is just, anybody's having trouble with kind of getting through this time right now, it's again, kind of recontextualize it and think about how you'd want to remember this, how you spent this time.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you on the show and a pleasure talking to you. And I wish you the very best of luck in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This has been great.
And I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone listening to or watching the Christian Reeve podcast. As I always say, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, share, and subscribe as always. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, leave us a review, leave us some feedback, leave us some ratings, let us know what you think of the podcast. And yeah, if there's anyone in particular you'd like to see on the show in the future, or any particular topics you'd like to hear on the actual podcast, let me know, and I would love to take that all on board and make it happen. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, for listening, and until next time, peace out, one love. I'll see you in the next one.